Hi everyone, Aileen here with One Click LCA, and I am joined today by Scott Norris, who is Director of Engineering Solutions for Steelcon. Welcome, Scott.
Thanks for having me.
And I'm also joined with by Nick Gallardi, EPD expert with One Click LCA. Welcome, Nick.
Hi, Aileen. Thanks for having me.
All right, well, let's just jump right into the conversation today. So, Scott, I would love it if you could introduce yourself, give us a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are today.
Uh, So my name's Scott Norris from Steelcon, Director of Engineering Solutions. And my role here is to focus on building on our innovative approach to designs where we're partnering with our consultants, contractors, owners to deliver successful projects. And now with the upcoming embodied carbon thresholds, really rolling sustainability into that approach and helping our clients meet their sustainability targets confidently. Prior to being at Steelcon, I was a structural consultant for 15 years. I worked on a lot of projects across multiple sectors with predominantly structural steel, transportation, industrial, transit, and institutional. And the large open spaces that were required in the program space really were efficient for structural steel structures. So that's kind of led me to this path and working with Steelcon, and that experience allows me to work well as a kind of as a consultant feel as a steel contractor with the consulting team.
That's great. Thank you so much for that history. Nick, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. Hi everyone. My name is Nick Gallardi. I am an EPD consulting expert here at One Click LCA. My background happens to be in materials engineering. That is my degree. I have been doing LCAs for about 4 years and in this consulting position for over 2 years now. Currently, I really help kind of teach and guide many of the people that come through One Click LCA to be able to do these LCA models to produce EPDs. And in my prior experience, I was actually on the other end of it. I was working within a manufacturing team, and I was actually doing some of the LCA research within that team to improve some of our R&D and the actual products within that line. So all of that experience has brought me here today.
Great, thank you. So, a lot of manufacturing knowledge here today. Glad to dig into this a little bit more. Scott, I'll start with you, and I would love if you could tell us more about SteelCon and why you guys are focused on sustainability.
We're focused on sustainability because we realize that structural steel has a huge impact in our society. I was listening to a podcast by US Steel called Steel Stories, where they were talking about in 2013, the Barack Obama administration had targeted 16 critical sectors that were required for effective government operation. And all those sectors, transportation, energy generation and transmission, emergency services, were very reliant on structural steel. So it shows you the importance that steel has, and we feel that we have a really crucial role and have can make a really positive impact through designing sustainably, since this has such a major role in our society. And then if you're going to show this impact, you need some sort of metrics. You need to be able to quantitatively calculate this. So that's where EPDs roll in. You need these EPDs to show those results to prove out what you're how you're impacting society.
Yeah, that's great. Nick, do you have any insight, further insight into sort of the steel industry and are you seeing more sustainable steel? Is SteelCon, uh, a leader in this industry?
I would say certainly, Steelcon is certainly a leader in the industry just because of kind of the push that they are doing sustainability wise with their structural steel. I think overall in North America, steel is starting to push towards higher recycled contents, even trying to be a little bit more recycled and greener a little bit. but the overall industry still needs to make a bigger push. But we are really starting to see that with kind of pioneers like Steelcon. But steel overall kind of gets pointed out at first because of the heavy impact that it does provide to the world, and really any steel. Whether it's structural steel or steel and rebar as well, it is being called out by Canadian federal governments, United States federal governments as something that we need to lower overall.
And Scott, you talked about your focus on sustainability, but what's your ultimate goal as a company in going green? What are you hoping to achieve?
So at the end of the day, the steel sector is a service industry. So really what we're trying to do is help our clients meet their sustainability goals. We need to partner with them and show them what we can do from that aspect to make sure they're having successful projects and hitting the thresholds that they need to hit in the coming years. But beyond that, we want to be a leader in the industry. We want our brand to be synonymous with innovation and sustainability. And we want to be that first mover kind of disruptor and not like in a website or a brochure kind of way, but in a tangible way where we're seeing results. And hopefully we become kind of the signal to the industry that green steel is required, that people are looking for it, and it starts to cause the industry, the service centers, everything upstream from us in the Ontario, Canada, U.S. markets to start to take notice of this and push for it. And also, we just want to do our part. We all see what the effects of emissions have on our planet, and Steelcom wants to be good neighbor, a good citizen, and help to provide ways to reduce these emissions.
Awesome. And are you guys focused on any specific um, uh, specific sort of industry standards like net zero, or do you have any internal goals that align to some of the broader goals that have been set by the industry as a whole?
So in general, with structural steel, the real major push is the material itself. The manufacturing process overall, at least from our services, producing our sin beams or their proprietary products, they don't have a huge impact on the end product as far as the GWP value. So really for us, our biggest win that we found is really sourcing the right material and driving the industry in that sense, is creating that signal, creating that demand for the green material, because it's really the emissions are tied to the mills, which are tied to the energy, the chemistry that's going on in the processes they're using. So it's trying to push to the right processes to get that material, the right material, and build that demand for that.
Yeah, it's definitely goes further than just sort of what one company is doing. It's a big interconnected system.
Mhm.
Nick, what are your insights on how that works? I know that you do a lot of EPD creation, and you've also worked with, generic EPDs. How do you see the sort of way the whole industry is interconnected, and how each part of the industry affects another?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, when it comes to these EPDs themselves, I mean, that in itself affects the whole entire industry. So I imagine actually, when I was helping Scott kind of create his first EPD, we were asking suppliers, do they have EPDs? And I imagine those suppliers also ask if they have EPDs. So all of these EPDs do build up upon one another. And it's really a lack of these EPDs right now. That is kind of connecting a lot of manufacturers like Scott. We're all kind of looking for some of these EPDs so that we can be able to procure better products because, I mean, Scott is not the only one that does see this issue, that materials are really impactful. We've done a lot of efforts in trying to reduce our operational carbon through decarbonizing the grid itself. And even builders themselves, they're finding that materials are really the culprit of this all. So when we're looking at this, building up the supply chain, um, yeah, I mean, every little step of it when it takes to build a product. Sure, we're working with structural steel. We may think this is a simple product, but there's probably 2 or 3 layers before it even gets to Scott. So all of these people would need EPDs or at least some type of data or at least need to decarbonize. So all of this gets added up and accumulates as we start adding those layers. So all of this is certainly interconnected, whether we look at the EPDs, the embodied carbon itself, and the materials that are going into it all.
Yeah, that's great. And Nick, I'm going to stick with you for just a second because I'm realizing we're talking a lot about EPDs, but there may be some people in our audience who aren't as familiar. So can you give us just a brief overview? What is an EPD and what, especially a third party verified EPD, why is that important?
Yeah, certainly. So an EPD stands for an Environmental Product Declaration. An Environmental Product Declaration is essentially documentation around a product's environmental impact given a certain life cycle. So we can determine that life cycle, can determine kind of what goes into that EPD itself. But it's really a snapshot in time of what is the embodied carbon or what are the environmental impacts that this product has given certain things that we do to it, whether we build it or how we dispose of it. Now, this is very key information for builders and architects so that they can be able to do their life cycle assessments. And a life cycle assessment is really a modeling way for us to be able to get information, to be able to provide it for things like an EPD itself, or even for a whole building life cycle assessment. So that is what an EPD is. An LCA model is what we need to be able to provide information for our EPD, and that's how these two worlds are connected.
Great. Thank you for that explanation. And so, Scott, now that we sort of have dug into EPDs a little bit, you are creating EPDs with Steelcon. And, we've talked a little bit about why this is important for sustainability in general and do the right thing. What do you see as the business benefits of having EPDs? Are you seeing a benefit to your business beyond sort of just the benefit to the environment as a whole?
Yeah, there definitely is a business advantage to having EPDs. Recently, we've been seeing EPDs being requested for many of the projects which are going out to tender now. So all materials that you're putting forward on your tender need a Type 3 EPD associated. So having that proactive approach and having these EPDs in hands is really paying off for us because we can attack these tenders, bid them competitively, and be confident in what we're putting forward. It also, we learned a tremendous amount by doing this just internally. And right off the bat, through the first iteration of EPDs we had for our sin beam and our joist, we actually had also engaged a third-party consultant named Mantle here in Toronto because we really wanted to have as fast an uptake as possible and we were really on the leading edge. And so that built a great foundation for us to then take a partnership with OneClick and have these live LCA models where we can do sensitivity analysis. And that's the real win for us at this point is to be able to swap materials in and out, look at what the overall impacts are, and do this on like a quick basis. Switch an EPD in the model, run the program, the results spit out, and you have the overall impact. And there's great graphic results that are given that make it really easy to digest what's happening and what's going on in those. So it also really helps us with all of these things. There's the cost side to this. So we need to go through and find through all this tinkering what's the actual cost impact. So that's why it's great to have this fast, responsive tool that we can use and then quickly vet this back and forth with the industry to see what the cost impacts are. And it allows us to not stop. Like that's the big thing is as the industry moves forward, as new materials become available, we can keep going, we can keep innovating and reducing emissions in our products.
That's great. And, when you're talking about sort of this constant feedback and not stopping and moving quickly, I assume that when you're creating your EPDs, you're sort of learning things about your setup and how your business operates. Give us some examples of some things you learned and sort of how you incorporated those learnings back into your process.
Yeah, I was trying to think of it as like what are the aha moments, but it was like what's the aha process kind of that we had here because it was so iterative as we were going along and again trying to move quickly, trying to get a real solid foundation right off the bat. So we started gathering all our information and submitting that for the original EPDs. And as that analysis was going on, we were looking at ways like we found out about Bruce Power, one of the local nuclear power plants, has emission or energy offsets, energy credits that you can purchase. So we were looking at that. Like, does that make sense? And then we got our results back from our first EPDs, and we're looking at the little sliver of responsibility that energy has in our overall emissions, and we go, okay, like that doesn't make sense. Like okay, forget that, ditch that. We're just going to keep like those are great ideas for the mills for the that are really using a lot of power. Then we went on to creating an EPD database in house, and I know these are available. I know OneClick has recently launched a similar database where you can look at all the GWP values of the materials kind of side by side. But right at the beginning for us, we had this database and we were bucketing all these different sources and materials and trying to figure out like if we want the best performers, the worst performers, and the middle performers, and kind of working through that, which then led us on to strategic sourcing of materials. So through those different buckets, then we could pick, okay, let's try this material, let's try that material, let's try that material, let's see how this overall impacts our EPDs. And because our EPDs are so material heavy on the emissions, it does have a tremendous impact. And then a couple of the last points were understanding transportation. That was a huge one that with my buckets, I'd thrown those all in there. And then it was funny, I ran all this analysis and then my worst performer, my mid performer actually flipped because I wasn't accounting for the fact that we were sourcing material from west Midwest on the continent, and that trucking has a meaningful impact where it actually flipped my tiers on me. So understanding that, and we also had material coming from mills in Mexico for our open web steel joist EPD, and we saw what the impact is for that. So that's a huge one. Is this whole thing is a process, right? It's you can't focus on one individual thing, or else you'll lose the forest for the trees. And then I think the last one was the impact of end of life. That actually for structural steel has a really big benefit. The amount of recycling, like the uh, net negative values that you get for the recycling is a big story that really in North America we're not talking about right now because our LCAs and our reporting is only focused on the material A1 to A3 and not following kind of the European approach of going the full life cycle. So we're doing great. We're on the right track. And then once we start to roll out the full end of life, then we'll start to see more of that story presented. So a real like learning process and a really big help along the way for all of this like fast responding data that we get right back in a matter of minutes in our hands and then get to start to analyze and make sense of.
That's great. I mean, that is just such several examples, but such a great story that shows that you can't reduce what you don't measure, and when you measure something, that's where you can get the insights into how to take action, which action will make the biggest difference. Like you said, looking at your energy consumption, even though that's sort of the big movement. That's what a lot of people talk about is reducing your energy, being energy efficient. But in your case, that didn't make nearly as big of an impact as some of these other measures that you looked at. That's super interesting. Nick, I know that you worked a lot with Scott and Steelcon in creating their EPDs. Do you have any insights, anything that you noticed, a sort of aha moment in the process that surprised you?
Well, I'd say, being a consultant, working with kind of Scott and even other manufacturers, this has really helped me kind of dispel some of my own myths or even my own biases. As a human, I had my own kind of judgments about, buying local is always better, and these types of things. And it's not only until, I really worked with Scott because he was really deep into that scenario analysis and really asking me a lot of questions throughout the time of what happens if we do this? What if we got this? I'm like, honestly, I don't know unless we do model it. And that is kind of the beauty of it. And I think for both of us, there was a lot of moments where we realized, oh shoot, this is a lot different than I had originally thought. And this is a great expectation that we had for this. So, this modeling is really great because it can really kind of knock all your judgments down to the ground, and you can be able to potentially procure sustainable products even across seas, somehow rather than buying local. And it's a lot of things where really, a lot of the times when I get questions from manufacturer, my favorite answer is it depends because it's always a case by case scenario. It is always a case by case scenario. But at least that is why we try to provide the most data out there as possible so that we can be able to look out there what is available, who out there in my supply chain actually has environmental data so I can be able to work off that. So I think right now, everyone is hungry for this EPD data at all levels of the stage, whether you're a raw material manufacturer, whether you're at the end of the manufacturing stage and you're selling to whole buildings. Everyone's needing an EPD. Like Scott said, even his clients are requesting for this for the buildings already. And I imagine he's already starting to request some people from his supply chain if they have EPDs themselves. So it's not too far out the expectation be getting requested with these EPDs. But what is far outside the expectation is when we model these and kind of some of the judgments and myths and biases that we hold really get put to the test in these modeling scenarios.
Awesome. So great. Well, great conversation. Thank you both for your insights, sharing your journey, sharing a little bit about what Steelcon is doing. And Nick, I'll just ask you real quick, sort of, what's your top takeaway from going on this journey with Scott and Steelcon?
Yeah, I think my top takeaway with all of this is really, I guess, twofold. One, the need for data, and everyone at all stages is being asked for this, and I can't emphasize it enough. This data is so important, not only for kind of us manufacturers helping one another, but also in the end, what it is meant for, kind of these lead points that these builders are asking for, even to win kind of client bids. That's kind of the thing. And with all of this, we really do need to help and support each other. That's kind of my other takeaway. We're asking all these questions about kind of EPDs, and I think a lot of us are in a similar place of either I don't know what it is, I don't know how to create it, and I think we're certainly going to all have to rely on each other on, this is what an EPD is, and trying to spread the word of why it is good for business, how we can start winning more business with it, and how it's also going to be the next generation of environmental impact reporting, either from a private sector push, as we're currently seeing, and also from a public sector or federal push as well. So that's kind of my biggest takeaway is a need for data and wanting to help each other out throughout this process.
That's great. And Scott, what about you? What's your biggest takeaway from going on this sustainability journey?
Yeah, so from the producer side, it's the information. It's kind of twofold as well. I'm gonna do two, just to like Nick, but the information gathering seems daunting, especially depending on where you are with having systems in place for gathering that information. But you don't wait. Get in there. Get as much information as you can. reach out to as many sources as you can, talk to people who know what they're talking about, like Nick here, and get that help and just start working through it because it is a super important process. And yeah, it seems very daunting at the beginning, but it gets easier as you get working through it and you start to make progress. You feel that success and you're kind of pushed along. But and then from the manufacturer standpoint, um, first off, kind of get an idea of where you're going. Before you jump into things, do some research, know what your numbers should look like in some rough way, shape, or form, because that's the best way to go back and be able to vet your results later on. And then once you've got an idea of where you're going, then go through, do your modeling, and start looking. Once you got your modeling done, then start looking at your results individually, pull it apart, look at your results, see what they all are, make sure they make sense with what your initial assumptions were, or find out that you didn't have the right initial assumptions. But vet that process, go all the way through, and then you'll be able to check your results and then challenge those results. Challenge what can I do better once you know you have a working model, you've vetted it from your first initial assumptions, you vetted all your numbers, you have a final result. Now go back in there, start digging through there, look at the pictorial results, see where your emissions are, and find your kind of hot spots and where you need to start digging into more and see what you can do at that point.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both so much for your time, for sharing your story. Really fascinating and really inspiring. And I think, especially in North America, we can all do a lot more about gathering this data so that we can reduce our carbon. So thank you both so much.
Yeah, thanks, Aileen.
Thanks so much, Aileen. Thanks for having me.